Well, but actually, this raises a really interesting question in my mind, Tom, which is that it seems to me that one of the key, because we talked about how the poem came out of oral tradition and how that's lost to us because we don't have video cameras, we don't have anything. But it seems to me that the metrical structure is one of those keys, because what we do know about performance in composition is that the metrics play an important part of that. And when we think about the Anglo-Saxon, to think poetry in Anglo-Saxon England meant to think in this one very specific metrical form, not in a whole bunch of different ones. Mm-hmm. So maybe the refinement that you're seeing is, the process of several hundred years of working within this, what for the poets, what for us seems a very unnatural language, but for them had to have been a very natural language, as Albert Lord talked about way back when with the Singer of Tales, when he talked about the grammar of what these things do. So, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think the meter shows us that this is high artistic achievement. I think it's also, the meter, curiously enough, is also one of the keys to its survival and transmission before being encoded on the page.
Exactly, and what you said about Lord and what John can remind us of is that as soon as oral formulaic poetry is discussed, meter enters into the definition of what it is, and you can probably give us a succinct definition of an oral formulaic form better than I, but it has to do with phrases that are repeated using the same metrical structure or a variation of the metrical structure, something like that.
The thematic elements to the, sort of the grander thing of, or the larger item of story patterns.
Absolutely.
So we have, and all of these things serve a function. So the metrics didn't develop just for to be technically dazzling, but they were serving some sort of mnemonic function or something having to do with the composition. And I think it actually, that is so strong that push is so strong that the importance of the metrics, the importance of the form is so strong that even once we take it out of the performance arena and our writing, that poets still write that way. Not as if they're imagining themselves performing, but that's just the way they think of poetry.
Among your comments was the observation that sometimes there is a melismatic moment, several notes to a single syllable. As far as the meter, I would say that there are two ways that the music and the instrument can work for or against the meter, and that's exactly it, for or against the meter. When you and I began collaborating, I had a notion of a syllabic style, one note to a syllable, and in fact, for these descending patterns of stress that you get in compound words, I wanted to hear a high note on the heaviest stress or the highest accent, a lower note on an intermediate stress, and yet a lower note on a syllable that didn't have stress in a one-to-one pattern, so that, to my mind, the melody would enhance the perception of the linguistic structure. Now, a melismatic moment in which there are several notes on a single syllable could arguably obscure the quantitative value of the syllable. And to my mind, that's not a problem, because in the text as we have it, certainly there are almost mathematically precise measurements of quantities of syllables. But I see nothing in the earlier traditions as we reconstruct them, or as in the parallel traditions of Old High German and Old Saxon, that would eliminate these melismatic moments. So that's one reason I have said that I see your performance as less bookish than what we've got from the person who wrote down Beowulf, and very likely, very plausibly to my mind, the way it could have sounded in the mead hall.
But that's the old question. Whose mead hall and when?
When?
And because there were many mead halls over many centuries.
Right, and then of course there are several references in Beowulf to the performance in the mead hall, and I find it hard to think that they're referring to what's going on right now, that this seems to me a kind of nostalgic, antiquarian moment, looking back to what once was
our
done.
Glorious Germanic
glorious
ancestors.
Germanic heritage.
A melismatic moment for many people, also for many musicians, is considered to be a moment of weight. that the weight is on the melisma. But for singers, a melisma can also be something which is just delaying the arrival at the next syllable, which might be very short, but it might be more important by having had that melisma before it. And that's the whole problem with the idea of accent versus length in a vocalized performance, that the long note isn't necessarily the accented note. The short note isn't necessarily a weaker syllable. All those things are quite variable depending on the register you choose, the rhythmic context of the performance around it. Is it in a very rapid moment when I'm really going as fast as I can, or is it a series of unimportant syllables leading up to something very important? There are all kinds of variables at work.
And I'm in agreement. I was just rehearsing what a pedantic critic who focuses on the meter, as I have done at periods in my life, might raise as an objection.
Yeah.
But the more we find, ironically, the more we find out about the meter, the less I think that that's an objection, the melismatic moments.
Yeah. I've tended to bring, oh, sorry.
No, it's just, it's alive. In the mouth of the singer, the tradition is alive, the song is alive. The metrical rules are there, but just as we break all sorts of grammatical and syntactic, I mean, you know, we break things in our speech, so too in the performance. Does it become a song? I agree entirely with you that it's there on the page, but I don't think that the singer, the performer, is imprisoned by them at all. And so, I mean, as long as you're staying within certain ranges of things, I think that the text, and again, this comes back to our sort of text bonded or text mindedness. That the text is there, and we like regularity, we like fixity.
Along those lines, I might add something just a little bit heretical that might support some of what Ben is doing. And I don't really think that you should feel badly about either the instrument leading you astray or you're leading yourself astray, because in any performative situation where the rubber meets the road is the effectiveness of the performance. Right. How are you communicating, not with an audience that we might dredge up heuristically from some moment in Anglo-Saxon England, but this audience here. How are you communicating with the audiences you perform before at Lincoln Center, wherever else it might be? You have found a way to communicate the living presence of Beowulf with arguably more accuracy to Anglo-Saxon philology than any other performer, and yet at the same time to connect to audiences here and now in the 21st century. That's what performance is about. It isn't only about respecting rules of meter or phraseology or pronunciation or other things. It has to do with, are you communicating? It's a problem in reception. Are you communicating with this audience now? And that you do so well, and I think that's what any performance that's successful does.